You know, after spending more than 40 years sitting on this bench, people often stop me and ask the same question. They want to know if it ever gets easier. They ask if the stories start blending together, if the faces become forgettable, if the emotions dull with time. And every single time I tell them the truth. The law doesn't change much. The statutes stay written in the same language. But the people who walk through those courtroom doors, they are never the same. Every day someone brings their entire life into that room with them. Their fears, their mistakes, their love, their breaking point. Most days are ordinary, routine cases, minor violations, parking tickets, expired meters, paperwork that barely carries a pulse. The courtroom moves along like clockwork. But then there are days that stop everything. Days that reach past the law and grab you somewhere deeper. Days that remind you that a courtroom isn't just about rules and punishment. It's a place where the fragility of human life is laid bare. The case I'm about to share with you is one of those days, one I will never forget. And before I tell you how it ended, let me ask you something. Wherever you're watching from right now, take a moment to subscribe and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Because what happened next isn't just a legal story. It's a lesson about love, desperation, and faith when everything feels like it's falling apart. It was a Tuesday morning in Providence. The sky outside was heavy and gray, rain tapping steadily against the courthouse windows. Inside, the rhythm of the day felt familiar. Christina handed me my coffee, black, no sugar. We went through the docket together, thin files, simple cases, nothing unusual. And then I saw it. One file that didn't belong with the rest. Thick, heavy, the kind of file that tells a story before you even open it. I flipped it open and began reading the officer's report. The words jumped off the page. 60 miles per hour in a 30 zone, multiple red lights ignored, erratic lane changes, reckless driving. I read it once. Then I read it again. On paper, it looked like a clear case of someone with no regard for public safety. The kind of case I've seen thousands of times. I straightened my robe, took a sip of coffee, and prepared myself for a difficult conversation. I expected a young, careless driver, maybe someone angry, maybe someone full of excuses. But when Christina called the defendant's name, the man who walked up to the podium stopped me cold. He wasn't young. He wasn't confident. He wasn't defiant. He looked haunted. That's the only word that fits. He appeared to be in his 40s, wearing a worn work shirt that looked like it hadn't been changed in days. His hair was messy. His shoulders slumped forward like the weight of the world was pressing him down. But what caught my attention immediately were his hands. They were gripping the sides of the wooden podium so tightly that his knuckles had turned completely white. He was shaking. Not the nervous fidgeting I see every day. This was real trembling, the kind that comes from deep fear. The courtroom, usually filled with shuffling papers and quiet whispers, fell into an unusual silence. You learn to read energy when you've been doing this job long enough, and the energy coming off this man wasn't arrogance or anger. It was terror. Pure, unfiltered terror. I glanced back down at the charges, then up at him again. "Good morning," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. He didn't respond right away. His eyes were fixed on the city seal carved into the bench, blinking rapidly like he was struggling to stay present. Finally, he looked up. His eyes were red, swollen, exhausted. "Good morning, Your Honor," he whispered. His voice was cracked, dry, like he hadn't slept in days. I opened the file. "Sir, according to this report, you were driving at excessive speeds, weaving through traffic and running red lights. These are serious violations. You put yourself and others at risk." As I read the charges aloud, I watched him closely. Usually people interrupt. They argue. They deny. They blame the officer or the conditions or their bad luck. He did none of that. He simply nodded, slowly, painfully. "I know, Your Honor," he said quietly. "I know what it says, and I'm not denying it. I did it." That stopped me. An admission like that usually ends the conversation. But something felt wrong. A man doesn't drive like that and then stand in front of a judge with that level of sorrow unless there's a reason beyond the law. I looked over at Christina and she gave me a small nod. She felt it too. "Sir," I said, softening my tone, "I've been doing this a long time. People don't drive that way for no reason. There's fear in your eyes. I can see it from here. Tell me, what was happening inside that car?" For a moment he couldn't speak. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He swallowed hard, fighting back tears. The entire courtroom leaned in. You could feel it. We all knew we were about to hear something heavy. Finally, he whispered 3 words that changed everything. "It was my daughter." He paused, his voice shaking. "She's 7 years old, Your Honor. She has severe asthma." The room felt different instantly. He went on, his words spilling out now. "We were at home. Everything was fine. We were just watching TV. Then she started coughing. Not a normal cough, that tight, wheezing sound. I gave her the inhaler. I did everything the doctors told us to do, but it wasn't working." I leaned forward as he continued. "She started turning blue, her lips. They were turning blue. She was grabbing at her throat and looking at me. I've never seen fear like that in a child's eyes." He took a shaky breath. "I panicked. I know I should have called 911. I know that now. But the hospital is only 10 minutes away. I thought if I waited, she wouldn't make it." His hands trembled harder. "I wasn't looking at the speedometer, Your Honor. I wasn't looking at the traffic lights. I was watching her in the mirror. She was gasping. Every breath was a fight." Then he said the words that made the courtroom gasp. "Halfway there, she stopped making noise." A chill ran through me. "I thought I lost her," he whispered. "I thought she died in my car. So yes, I ran the red light. I would have driven through a wall if it meant saving her." The silence in that room was unbearable. The courtroom remained frozen after he said those words. No one moved. No one spoke. I sat back in my chair and slowly removed my glasses. I looked toward the police officer standing near the side of the room. Even he, a man who has seen countless accidents and tragedies, looked shaken. The law is simple. Red means stop. Speed limits are numbers. But life doesn't always give you the luxury of calm decisions. Life doesn't pause when your child stops breathing. I took a breath and leaned forward. "Sir," I asked gently, "tell me what happened when you reached the hospital. Is your daughter okay?" He looked down at his hands again, gripping the podium like it was the only thing keeping him upright. The tension in his shoulders didn't leave. "They took her right away," he said quietly. "I carried her inside. They intubated her. They saved her life that night." He paused, and that pause told me everything. "But," he whispered. That single word hung in the air like a storm cloud. "She's still in the ICU, Your Honor," he continued. "She's been there for 3 days now. She's on a ventilator. Her lungs are weak. The doctors say she's stable, but they can't take her off the machines yet. She's fighting. My little girl is fighting for every breath." I felt something tighten in my chest. I looked back down at the file on my desk. Speeding, red light violations, reckless driving. The total fines came to nearly $500. On paper, it was just a number. To the city, it was routine revenue. But looking at the man standing in front of me, exhausted, shaking, wearing worn work boots and clothes that smelled of sleepless nights, I knew that $500 might as well have been $5 million. "I haven't left her side," he went on, his voice barely audible. "I've been sleeping in the chair next to her bed. I only left today because I was terrified that if I didn't show up here, you'd issue a warrant. I couldn't risk being taken away from her. I had to come." He looked up at me then, and the desperation in his eyes was absolute. "Your Honor, I'm self-employed. I'm a contractor. If I don't work, I don't get paid. I haven't worked in 4 days because I can't leave her alone. The medical bills are already piling up. The rent is due next week, and now I have these fines." He gestured weakly toward the paperwork in my hands. "I know I broke the law. I know I drove fast. But if I have to pay this money, I don't know how I'm going to buy her medication when she comes home. I don't know how we'll keep the lights on." I sat there in silence, letting his words settle. "This is the part of the job that stays with you. The law says he's guilty. He admitted it. The statute is clear. But justice isn't a machine. Justice isn't supposed to crush people who are already broken." I glanced over at Inspector Quinn, who often represents the police department in my courtroom. He shifted uncomfortably, staring down at the floor. Even he knew that enforcing the letter of the law in this moment felt wrong. It felt cruel. "Sir," I said softly, breaking the silence, "you are carrying a burden no parent should ever have to carry. The fear of losing a child is the greatest fear there is, and the fear of financial ruin on top of that, it's too much for one person." He nodded slowly. Tears finally spilled over, rolling down his unshaven cheeks. "I just want her to come home, Judge," he said. "That's all I want. I just want to hear her laugh again. I knew then that this case wasn't about a traffic ticket anymore. This was a man standing at the edge of his breaking point. And if I pushed him, if I demanded that money, I might be the one to finally break him. I refused to be that person. But before I could make any ruling, there was one more thing I needed to understand. I needed to know if he had anyone helping him, anyone sharing this burden. "Where is her mother?" I asked quietly. "Is there anyone helping you through this?" He froze. His face changed instantly. A different kind of pain washed over him, deeper than fear, deeper than exhaustion. He looked down at the floor, and for a long moment he didn't speak at all. The silence in the courtroom became heavy, suffocating. When he finally looked up, his voice was barely a whisper. "She's gone, Your Honor," he said. "My wife passed away 2 years ago. Cancer." He twisted the wedding band still on his finger. "Since then, it's just been me and my daughter. Just the two of us." He swallowed hard. "I promised my wife. I promised her I would protect our little girl. I promised her I wouldn't let anything happen to her. And when she stopped breathing in that car, I felt like I was breaking that promise. I felt like I was failing them both." His voice cracked completely. "If I lose her too, Judge, I have nothing left. I can't survive that." I felt a physical weight settle in my chest. I looked around the room. Christina had tears in her eyes. Inspector Quinn was staring at the floor, shaking his head slowly. We weren't witnessing a violation anymore. We were witnessing a man's absolute desperation to hold on to the only family he had left. "Sir," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "I am so deeply sorry for your loss. I cannot imagine the strength it takes to carry that kind of grief while trying to be both a mother and a father at the same time." He wiped his face with his sleeve. "I try, Your Honor. I work double shifts when I can. I try to be there for every appointment, but this week, with her in the hospital and now this, I feel like I'm drowning. Like the water finally went over my head." I looked back down at the ticket. $500. In the grand scheme of things, it was nothing. But for this man, it was an anchor dragging him under. "You are not drowning here," I told him firmly, leaning forward. "Not in my courtroom." I paused, then asked, "Did you eat today?" He looked surprised. He hesitated, then shook his head. "No, Your Honor. I haven't eaten since yesterday. I didn't want to spend the money. I thought I might need it for the court." That admission broke me. Here was a man starving himself to pay a traffic ticket while sitting beside his daughter's hospital bed. I knew then that simply dismissing the ticket wouldn't be enough. This man didn't just need a ruling, he needed help. I turned toward Inspector Quinn. "Inspector," I asked, "do you believe this man was acting in response to a medical emergency?" He looked up without hesitation. "Your Honor, if it were my daughter in that car, I would have driven the same way. Maybe faster. The department has no objection to whatever you decide." That was all I needed. I turned back to the father. "I'm going to make a ruling," I said, "and I want you to listen carefully." I picked up the thick file, the one filled with violations and fines, and closed it firmly. "I am dismissing every single charge. Speeding dismissed. Red light violations dismissed. Reckless driving dismissed. You do not owe this court $1. His knees buckled. He grabbed the podium to keep himself from falling. A sob escaped him, raw and uncontrollable. "Thank you," he cried. "Thank you, Judge." I nodded gently. "But we're not finished yet." There are moments when silence becomes heavier than any sound. The room was full, faces everywhere, yet inside there was a loneliness so deep it felt endless. Eyes were open, fixed forward, but the mind was trapped somewhere else, stuck in a moment that refused to let go. Breathing continued, but it wasn't the kind of breath that means living. It was the kind that simply keeps the body functioning. Inside, a single question kept echoing again and again. Is telling the truth ever enough? Or does truth sometimes turn into its own punishment? Hands were tightly clasped together, not in prayer, but as if they were holding each other up. The slight trembling in the fingers wasn't from cold. It came from fear, from regret, from the realization that control had already slipped away. No one in the room looked like an enemy, yet the pressure was suffocating. With every passing second, the weight in the air grew heavier. Words were ready, forming somewhere inside, but the voice refused to follow. Tears filled the eyes, not suddenly, but slowly. They were built from sleepless nights, from moments when everything could have been stopped, from decisions that might have been different. Each tear carried the memory of a choice that could never be undone. This wasn't a cinematic scene. There was no background music, no dramatic pause to soften the blow. This was reality, raw, exposed, and unforgiving. A place where running from yourself is impossible. For a brief moment, time seemed to freeze, as if failing to speak now would mean never speaking again. The heart pushed forward, the mind warned of consequences, and the tongue finally tried to move. But sometimes speaking is the hardest thing a person can do, especially when the words aren't meant to hurt someone else, but to cut deep into yourself. There were no heroes here, no villains either, just a human being standing with his mistakes, his fear, and a quiet hope that someone might understand. That someone might see this moment for what it truly was, not a question of guilt or innocence, but a question of humanity. A single tear fell, slow, silent. No applause followed, no reaction came, but within that one tear lived everything words had failed to express. The truth that what was lost would never return, the reality that what could have changed didn't, and the certainty that whatever remains now must be carried forward. Time began to move again. The air in the room became noticeable once more, but something inside had already broken, and something else had changed forever. This wasn't an ending. It wasn't the final chapter of any story. It was simply the acceptance of a truth, and sometimes accepting the truth is the bravest thing a person can do, because sometimes silence is the loudest voice of all.